it's all but impossible to reinvent ourselves the later stage of our career that we find ourselves in. And I tell people, you need to look at your career, you need to look at your profession, you need to look at yourself professionally in about 3 to 5 year increments. Because in today's world, everything changes that quickly. This is not your father's dental practice. Your business is going to change a lot, and you should too.
Here's my special request of you, my avid and loyal and faithful listeners. Of the thousands of listeners I've had in 2024, less than 10% of you are subscribed to the podcast. That means 90% of you are listening to my podcast, and yet you're not subscribed. Why not? Well, it's just because you haven't taken the time to do it. I know, I get busy to the same thing, and I fail to subscribe to the content that I like. So if you enjoyed or found my content helpful, clicking the subscribe or follow button right now will help the algorithms push my content to more people who can find it just as valuable. Plus, if you are a subscriber, you ensure you won't miss any of my content or updates as soon as they come out. I am personally excited about the upcoming guests, books, and projects that I'm working on, and sincerely don't want you to miss out on any of them. So hit that subscribe button. Stay tuned for more. Now, back to our conversation. Today, I'm very pleased to share a conversation with a dear friend of mine and entrepreneurial powerhouse, Mr. Perrin Desportes. Every time I've had Perrin on my podcast, he brings so much wisdom and knowledge. He's one of the people in my network that I love to connect with and dive deeper into the challenges that I'm currently working through. Co-founder of Polaris Healthcare Partners and Tusk Partners, Perrin has over 30 years of experience in the business side of dentistry, the first 15 of which he ran 3 different business units for Patterson Dental Supply. In this episode, expect to hear the difference between an operational manager and a forward-thinking leader. What makes a mutually beneficial and thriving mentor and mentee relationship? Why leadership can be isolating and how to avoid it. Upgrading your business means upgrading yourself. The kinds of businesses that will succeed today. Building a business that aligns with your lifestyle and avoids additional hardship. The one goal every business should have to be successful. The self-sabotage every CEO, business owner, and entrepreneur must overcome. And much, much more. Please welcome Mr. Perrin Desportes. Well, Perrin, it's great to have you back. You and I have just enjoyed some collaboration and just some overall planning at different levels over the last several years. I've enjoyed it very much because I see so much synchronicity and synergy with the way you and I think and who we like to serve, and in our own lives, how we are constantly evolving and twisting and turning and iterating to choose a path and choose the clients and choose the problems that we like to solve. And that's right where you are, but it didn't start where you are today. Of course, there's this long background, and I alluded to the fact that you've been in the business aspect of dentistry. Actually, your family has for decades, and you yourself led several different platforms at Patterson over a number of years, left that, and then you helped form Tusk Partners, and then more recently, Polaris Partners, and now you're on to the next, which is next level executive, which is what we're going to kind of talk about today. So maybe just for the benefit of our listeners, who are all, as we know, entrepreneurs at various levels, and always, I think, hopefully thinking like we do, there's an opportunity to always evolve your position wherever you started in life and evolve it the way you want to do it, the way you dream, the way you see it. Tell us how that's kind of worked for you a little bit. Just give us a little bit of that history and how you've ended up where you are today.
Yeah, thanks, David. Great to be on with you. Happy 2025. Good to be back with you. Even though we talk so frequently, I still feel like I never get a chance to spend enough time with you. So I appreciate this opportunity for sure. And it's kind of that Steve Jobs quote, you can never connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect the dots looking back. And, my entrepreneurial journey is very evolutionary, I would say. I started out in business. My family owned a dental distribution company called Thompson Dental Company. I was 4th generation in that business. Most family-held businesses don't make it from the founder to the successor, let alone 3 or 4 generations. We sold that business to Patterson in April of 2002. And I like to tell people, not for operational reasons, the company was growing tremendously quickly. It was about 14 sales offices from Baltimore through Orlando in the Southeast on the run rate of about 100 million in revenue and employed about 400 people. So it wasn't a small business, but it was a regional business, financed through debt funding, bank funding. dental distribution is a consolidation type of a business. And we had equity issues transitioning from my grandfather, second generation, through my father, and then potentially on to me. It never got that far. So sold the business to Patterson in April of 2002. I was 31 at the time and, was nervous about it, as anyone would be being early in their career and going through an acquisition or being on the acquired end of an acquisition. And Patterson was gutsy enough to allow me the opportunity to become a general manager at that stage of my career. And I didn't really know what that meant. They picked me to run the Richmond branch, Richmond, Virginia. Bad culture, a lot of turnover, poor leadership, a lot of nepotism. I think they kind of figured this thing's so screwed up, Perrin can't screw it up anymore, so we'll give him a shot with it. And when I got to Richmond, the training program at Patterson was, here are the keys, don't screw it up. That's not really the vote of confidence you're looking for when you're kind of scared, to be perfectly honest with you. The reason I state that is because one of the things I learned really early on in my Patterson career, and I was the beneficiary of this, I didn't go about this proactively. So this would be learning lesson number one for your audience, if you will. I had a couple of people take me under their wing. Richmond was what they call a mid-tier branch. It was a middle market size for the geography that it covered. And Patterson had major markets like Baltimore, Dallas, Chicago, Los Angeles, Boston, these bigger metropolitan markets that were really enormous businesses. And as I was coming up in Richmond, trying to figure it out, trying to make the right calls on people, on strategy, on managing a P&L, and all those other responsibilities, I had a couple of people in what they called them Group 1 branches, major markets, take me under their wing and really mentor me. I learned the value of a mentor, a guide, somebody taking the time and the interest to share their wisdom and experience with me early on in my career that probably, if I'm being completely candid, saved me from myself. It helped me not step on the typical landmines that every new general manager would step on. And I was a massive beneficiary of that because I could look up at Bob Foss, who ran the Baltimore branch as an example, and I could say, oh, he's been with the company for 15 years. He's running a major metropolitan market in the Baltimore, DC market. That's how you do it. That's what leadership looks like at a major market level. And then a couple of years later, they thought highly enough of me to promote me to be the general manager in the Metro New York, New Jersey branch, which was a large metro area and one of the largest branches in the company. And at that point, I was able to look up the food chain at the people running the company, the executives that made all the big decisions. And I could look up and say, okay, that's how you do it at an enterprise level. So my leadership ability evolved, it grew. Some of it was intentional when I started to kind of figure it out, like to help craft my path. But a lot of it was experiential wisdom that others took the time and were patient enough to share with me to develop me as a leader. Now that I'm 54 and I look back on that with complete clarity and the utmost admiration, it is something that I am extremely grateful for because if those people hadn't done that, I don't know where I would have ended up. It was that instrumental in my professional development as a leader. And, over a 15-year career at Patterson, had the opportunity to lead 3 different branches, and a couple of them won a number of awards over that period of time. It's a total team effort, obviously, but the branch manager, the general manager, is the straw that stirs the drink and sets the tempo and picks the people and communicates the strategy and everything. And I think that level of leadership is incredibly important. And I think it's one that we can dive a little bit deeper into in this discussion. We can also talk about entrepreneurism too.
Yes, absolutely. No, this is great. A great start. So yeah, I've got some follow-up, a few questions. One is, I'm surprised that an enterprise the size of Patterson didn't have more of an onboarding, or in this case, a new manager. That was, here's the keys, go for it. Was that typical for all of their branches, or particularly the more mid-tier branches like Richmond that they stuck something in, or was this just a one-off and Richmond wasn't doing so well, so they just thought, like you said, we'll just throw it to the wind and see what this guy can do?
Yeah, great, insightful question. And let me answer it this way. they always have had a, I don't know what they call it, but it's like a new manager training program. And it's more from an operational construct, how the business fits together, how to read a P&L, how to do what I would call the mechanical
Hmm.
things, right?
Right.
And every business, whether it's dentistry or a services business or a dental distribution business or anything else, every business has some component of operations and systems and processes and the way the thing is supposed to fit together to create the widget or the service that comes out of that, right? And for most of us who are successful in our careers, we can master that relatively quickly and to a high degree of fit and finish, I would say. The difference in good businesses and great businesses is the leader's ability to see around the corner and to make judgment calls without all the facts and when things aren't apparent. You don't need a great leader to make an obvious decision. You need a great leader to pick the right people, to communicate the right ideas, and to allocate the right resources, the way Jack Welch would have said it. And those leaders that are able to pick the right people, communicate the right strategy, the right ideas, and allocate the resources, which is usually time or funding, are the ones that typically build businesses that are far greater than the average. They produce returns, they grow revenue faster than the market average, they grow profitability faster than sales. They typically have less key employee turnover, and they typically have higher customer satisfaction, or in this case, patient satisfaction ratings. And what I would say is Patterson did an extremely good job of giving me the foundations of how to operate a branch. The mentors that took me under their wing and that I was able to learn through at several different levels of the organization made me a better leader to see around corners. And I think through that, I was able to produce greater results for the company.
Perrin, what do you think makes a good mentor and mentee relationship? And was there any incentive other than just goodwill from those who had gone ahead of you, who had achieved a certain ability as leaders that you could look up to? Was there any other incentive for them to want to take you a little bit under their wing, other than they just like to see people like you who have a desire and a drive, and they saw something in you and said, "Want to help this guy"? What made that possible, do you think?
Yeah, I would say for the most part, it is the latter. And the reason that I say for the most part is that, in business and in life, Dave, there are people who derive a lot of personal fulfillment, satisfaction, and joy out of developing other people, out of sharing their wisdom, their experience, and feeling like it's not falling on deaf ears. So, a mentor mentee relationship is absolutely a relationship. A business coach to a pupil is a relationship, whether it's contractual or otherwise. But it takes two to tango because obviously you want to pick the right person who has the experience you're trying to emulate. But you also, for the mentor or the coach, you need to have the person who is willing to take guidance, to I don't want to say admit their failures, but like admit the fact that they don't know everything. And in our world of coaching, developing healthcare services and everything, you and I are in pretty rarefied air. The people we work with, our clients, our subscribers are the best of the best. And the people that you and I get to spend a lot of time with don't have a whole lot of shortcomings. I mean, they're playing the game at a really, really high level. And it would be really easy for everybody in that subset that I just mentioned to take the attitude of, well, I make 2x what the average dentist does. I'm infallible. I can't do anything wrong. I don't need to listen to anybody else. And to me, that's just stupid. It's incredibly short sighted because you and I have been around long enough to know that the evolutionary journey of an entrepreneur goes through ebbs and flows. It changes over time. They're called inflection points or ceilings of complexity. And this is a scenario where what you're really good at today in terms of generating returns and creating success in today's world probably is not sustainable beyond about 3 or 4 or 5 years. And if it's not, then you've got to be the leader to see around the corner to figure out what the next phase of growth looks like for you as a person and the business that you own and operate. And by the way, you got to do it in a way that's not incongruent with what you want your family life to be.
Yeah, that's a piece that I know early on in my life, I sort of left that out thinking I'll get to it when, right?
Yeah.
I'll
Yeah.
get to it
We all
when. And
do, right? Yeah.
we all do, right? So I really appreciate these insights because I do know, because again, I've lived this, you've lived this to a certain point, but we're fortunate and I guess blessed that we get sort of tapped on the shoulder when we're young and we had to show some ambition and some intellect, pass the test, really what it was about in school. You passed the test, okay? So you got the A's and the B's or whatever you got, but it was enough for people to kind of say, anoint us and say, you should become XYZ. And so we sort of did, right? And we have this idea that being that rugged individualist. So, okay, I'm good for it. I'll take it on. And the world's kind of applauded me for that, so I'll take it on and I'll continue to do so. And yes, you get to a point where you've graduated and you go into your career, your profession, business, whatever it is. And you look around and you're in a place where you're hiring staff, employees, well, definitely necessary people to have, and you want to do the best job there. But you're kind of isolated where everybody looks up to you because you're the licensed professional, you've got the credentials, right? So you're supposed to know it all. And so we kind of take this on, unfortunately, at least I feel like I did. I took it on, yeah, I better be that person. So then it's like, well, if I ask for help, I'm going to look weak.
Yeah.
So I just need to act like I got it all together. Bad move,
Yeah.
real bad move, because every time I did that, it took me a whole lot longer to dig out of the hole. And I stepped into many holes over my lifetime. It would have been a lot easier if I would have had a few people. I said, hey, you know what? I'm a little weak over here. Could you throw me the lifeline? I'm ready to grab hold. Tell me what to do. And I'm ready to follow, right?
Yeah, you're 100% correct. So let's just double click on that for a second, because I think this is something that I've kind of witnessed, for lack of a better term, in the last decade or so in a consulting relationship with people trying to build group practices. We can get into that in a little bit. But today's dentists or healthcare professionals, period, it's not unique to dentistry, but they're usually incredibly bright in high school. They go to the best colleges, they get the highest grades in some of the hardest classes. They go into medical school or dental school or whatever the professional school is. They're at the top of their class, they pass their boards, they buy into or buy out a practice or start their own. And what, by 30, 31, 32, mid 30s at the latest, you're at the top of the food chain in terms of the people who work around you.
Yes.
It's typically a small team. It is literally your name on the door and your name on the license. And now you transition from this, what I'd call like a master clinician, somebody who's got all the clinical skill sets solved and can create all the clinical outcomes. You kind of start having Groundhog Day, and that can be a good thing in some ways, not forever, but
Just to make sure here now, you dropped a Steve Jobs on us earlier. I don't know if everybody knows what Groundhog Day means. I mean,
okay.
I do. I've seen the movie many times. I love it. But why don't you explain what that means, just so the context is understood?
Yeah, Groundhog Day is just a non-specific term about doing the same thing over and over again and like literally having the same day over and over for multiple decades of your life, typically in a professional endeavor type of a setting. And I think healthcare services, dentistry specifically, kind of lends itself to that. If you're practicing clinically Monday through Thursday, 8 hours a day, you've got the same staff, you go to the same place, you do the same sets of procedures for the most part. Yeah, the patients change, but the conditions don't, the outcomes don't. What you find is that people kind of get lulled to sleep in terms of this cadence. I think the challenging thing is it sort of goes back to what I said early stages of my career at Patterson, where I said I could look up the organization and I could see how leadership was done at a higher level. A successful dentist early in their profession, early 30s maybe, has a great degree probably of clinical mastery and probably a very financially successful practice and hopefully minimal staff turnover. But what are they doing for themselves from a professional development standpoint? They are sort of on an island. You and I have built enough businesses to know that leadership can be a really lonely, lonely position, as entrepreneurship is. And if we don't constantly make reinvestments in ourselves, if we're not trying to surround ourselves with trusted advisors who will tell us the truth even when we don't want to hear it, the people who will reach down and say, look, you're a clinician who owns a great practice. Let me tell you what it's like to be an entrepreneur who owns a great business. Here's the way you become a more effective executive. Like, what does that mean? And I think that coming out of a corporate environment, for better or for worse, I could kind of look around me up and down the organization. And I could kind of see what that looked like, not just from a hierarchical standpoint, but from a skill set standpoint. Your average dentist who owns a successful practice gets pretty isolated pretty quickly. And if they're not careful, they can get lulled to sleep as Groundhog Day over multiple decades at a time to diminishing returns. It's all but impossible to reinvent ourselves the later stage of our career that we find ourselves in. And I tell people, you need to look at your career, you need to look at your profession, you need to look at yourself professionally in about 3 to 5 year increments. Because in today's world, everything changes that quickly. This is not your father's dental practice. Your business is going to change a lot, and you should too.
There's a modern cliche that says, time is money. But is that really true? I prefer George Gilder's phrase, money is tokenized time. After working with hundreds of doctors, dentists, and high-achieving professionals over the years, I've witnessed a troubling pattern. Many well-meaning and successful people are optimizing wealth using the wrong currency. Here's what I mean. Society's definition of success often equates to financial prosperity. A bigger practice, a higher income, and just more stuff. But what I've learned, both personally and professionally, is that this model of success often comes at a steep cost. Time. Time to spend with your family. Time to pursue passions. Time to simply live. In my new book, Scaling Time versus Wealth, I explore why the traditional model is broken and what we can do to fix it. This book is not another time management book. It's a call to redefine success on your own terms. Are you optimizing your life for autonomy and freedom, or some other metric of success? Of all the books that I've written over the last few years, this one may well have the most potential for true, meaningful impact in your life. Go to scalingtimeversuswealth.com to request your copy.
This is like where the term burnout comes from, and burnout's real. Groundhog Day, the repetitive day after day after day. I guess the one area that can offer some clinical challenges or opportunities maybe would be, technology advances. So that can be fun. The latest gizmo, and allows us to do more advanced treatment, the ability to solve deeper clinical problems. So that's a piece. And that's what we went to school for primarily, to be that skilled technician and to advance our career through even better skills as the industry evolved and we could evolve with it. So you spoke about investing in ourselves, and that's a big piece. People think when we say to a doctor, dentist, investing in yourself, usually they say, well, how many CE courses have you taken this year? And again, the ones who have really climbed the ladder, they've got a bunch. They've got, and that's great. I mean, I'm a fan. But I think what we're talking about here is growth in a different term or a different phase. And that's what I want, that's what we're here to talk about here today, because I think it is so important. And this is where I want you to bring some of your color in, because you've had the opportunity now over a number of years to work with many fine clinicians, you said, high caliber, different practices and models, quote, successful, but in helping doctors who are looking for something more, and more doesn't have to be more revenue, more EBITDA. It doesn't have to be even scaled up multiple practices. That's usually what the markers that we tend to in the industry hang our hat on. Well, how big, how much, profit. That's a marker, but we know that's not always satisfying. And to that end, I'm going to bring this full circle. What's brought you to where you are today? Next level executive. Why for you this, and why now?
I'm no different than most other evolving entrepreneurs in a dynamic marketplace. Some of this is, I would say, like research or thought process, or kind of digging deep and trying to read the tea leaves. And again, for my own personal self-leadership, trying to see around the corner and things. The last decade, you're right, I have been a full-fledged entrepreneur. I left Patterson in January of 17, so 8 years ago. launched a business called Tusk Partners that some of your audience may know about, M&A transaction firm. Left Tusk 4 years ago with my partner, DeWalker Sinha, to launch Polaris Healthcare Partners that does both transactions, debt and equity, as well as strategic consulting and associate equity models. All of that is predominantly in the group dentistry space, some non-dental, but most of it is 90% of it's dental. I think that the two businesses were nicely bookended by a lead up to COVID and then post COVID. And the entrepreneurs we got a chance to work with over that period of time went through a lot and changed a lot. And if you don't mind me just kind of expounding upon this for a quick second, if we think back to 2018, 2019, and even the very, very beginning of 2020, everybody was building a group practice to sell a group practice. They
Right.
wanted to ring the cash register. Private equity was still relatively new in the industry. The returns were phenomenal. Time frames to hold were very short. It was the gold rush, right? Then when COVID hits and all the businesses shut down, the government wants to stimulate everything and encourage people to take on tons of debt. You had a bunch of people fanning the flames of the M&A markets. You had a bunch of businesses that were looking to acquire as much as they could because it didn't cost them anything to borrow money. They could borrow a lot of it. And there were a lot of people who were scared about owning a dental, any type of healthcare practice, but certainly dentistry coming out of COVID. And so what we had globally was the world's greatest 12-month run of M&A in every vertical. Well, what happened after that? Rates escalate pretty quickly. Every private equity group that buys assets uses debt funding to do it, and they do it akin to an interest only loan. So, Dave, when you and I go out and buy a home that's far beyond our reach and we do it on an interest only loan when interest rates are 2.25, we can buy a lot of house. Then all of a sudden, less than 2 years later, when mortgage rates are 6.5, all of a sudden that monthly payment looks a lot worse to us. And we're scratching our head thinking, how are we going to make the payment? And by the way, we're not paying any principal. So this is the conundrum that a lot of the people are now facing who sold their business to a private equity backed group, and the returns haven't materialized. And some of these groups have fallen on hardships. And a lot of the entrepreneurs who are dentists who have one or two locations and are contemplating adding an additional location or possibly two are looking at all their peers where this didn't turn out so great. And they're saying, maybe I don't want to build a business to sell it. Maybe this is a good cash flow business that I could figure out how to evolve, own, and operate over a 10 to 20-year life cycle, bring in a couple of minority partners, maybe. Why am I in a hurry to do it? And I think this is the greatest thing that could happen to dentistry. I'm not going to get in a soapbox here, but I really think the irrational exuberance, Alan Greenspan term that you and I know pretty well, of a couple of years ago that is now more rational expectations is great for the profession. And the mindset of the entrepreneur is one of, okay, I'm going to be methodical about my growth strategy. I want the debt that I take on not to detract from what I'm trying to build on a family home front. If I do bring in partners, I need to think about under what auspices, buy in, earn in, what's the right tool in the toolbox? Do I even want partners? And I really want to be a more effective executive in terms of leading this business. I want to know how it fits together. That way I can make decisions that I'm confident will be congruent with the business I want to build. And I understand that one decision I make today probably has some degree of interconnectivity on decisions I will have to make in the future. These entrepreneurs are completely different from a mindset standpoint and to a degree a commitment level than those that were pre-COVID. And I absolutely love where the space is. I've seen this from working with a lot of them over the last 8 years in two different companies. And to finally get to answer your question here, the reason that I wanted my evolutionary journey to evolve into doing more coaching than consulting is because most consulting firms, be it Polaris or otherwise, for somebody to need their services, they have to be of some level of size and might to be able to afford them, to need them, and to apply them. And that's the right solution, consulting services to the right segment of the market. And then there's dental practice management consultants that work on operational stuff to help people run a better practice. But if you've got practice mastery and you're not at a point where you can either afford or need or apply true consulting, there's a segment in the middle that's completely unaddressed. And there's a big gap between the dock and the boat in how we get there. And that's the space I kind of want to live in. It's the successful practice owners who have mastered a lot of their clinical skill set who say, I want to be a better CEO. Like, what does a CEO of a group healthcare practice actually do? And how do I become a better one so that I can build a more stable business that's not overburdened with debt, produces nice cash flow, and is arguably maybe more akin to a lifestyle business. And I think Next Level Executive was born out of that realization for me in the current marketplace.
This is so important, Perrin, and you're the perfect person who, from a very high level and your experience going back in the family Thompson dental business, but over the years, and particularly your work, as you said, pre-COVID, you're at the forefront. I think you're way beyond most people. That's why I love talking to you, because you definitely can forecast it. You've seen this evolve. Is the pre-COVID, post-COVID, which really set up the dynamics of, as we know, private equity, whether it's private equity or real estate markets or the financial markets. The low cost of capital has driven things to that irrational exuberance. And we are definitely, in my opinion, I think your opinion as well, back to fundamentals, which is good. It's good across the board, but most people don't like that because they want the high flyers. Let's go back to the high flyer days. Well, can we just have a reality check here and say, likely not going back there anytime soon. So don't become despondent. There's opportunities now to redesign, and it's a mindset shift. It's a mindset shift. If you thought you're going to build up and scale up and be out in 2 years with grandiose multiples, well, better double check that at the door. Okay, don't go into depression mode. It's okay, right? You're in the perfect place to lead the charge for those who get it and go, okay, now Perrin, help me, because I do have those clinical skills. I'm always working on them, but I have the clinical skills. I've got a relatively good team around me. Can always be improved, of course. Processes, operations, not bad, but man, I'm getting a little bit burned out in the chair. You talked about, do you bring on associates, maybe some minority partners? There's a lot of iterations of this. Is this what Next Level Executive is about? Is about digging into the individual and what their tendencies are and what their goals are and what their vision is, and you're helping them filter through that and come up with a game plan to take them to their next, whatever that may be.
I would even go a step beneath that and just share, this is more my opinion, but I think you'll agree with me here. David, if my house is worth $1 million and somebody wants to buy it for $3 million, I'll sell it tomorrow, right? But selling a business is a little bit different than selling a house. And I think there are a lot of people who own practices or small groups right now, today in 2025, who look back on to 2021-ish timeframe and have FOMO, fear of missing out, and think that, oh, the gold rush happened then and I missed it. I should have sold my life's work at that point in time. Well, let me pump the brakes for a second on this, because you might have gotten the $3 million valuation on your house back in 2021, but if you only got about 1.2 million of it in cash, then maybe it wasn't the deal that you thought. So you didn't miss out on what you think you missed out on. That's the first thing. The second thing is, there's still far too many people in our collective industry that are fanning the flames of 80% consolidation, and we're all going to end up working for a private equity group within 5 years and all this other stuff. The AMA, American Medical Association, had a statistic I saw a couple of months ago that said that family physicians, there's still 27% of them that are independent. And they've been at this thing a lot longer than the dentists have, okay? So let's pump the brakes for a second and not say that we're all going to end up working for a private equity group by the turn of the decade, because I don't believe that's true. So if that's the case, then we think about how to build a business that's worthy of our risk tolerance and affords us the outcomes that we want. And I think a lot of that comes to, let's just be honest, personal levels of income. None of us do what we do for free, and that's quite all right. It also comes from stability. Typically speaking, businesses that have more than one owner in key positions are typically more stable. Think associates in this construct. Now, they don't have to be equal partners, they might be minority partners. But how do you bring in partners into a business? That's not an easy thing to answer. And you should answer it for yourself before you go off and have the conversation with an associate. All right. There's a lot of there that you need to unpack and think through from a founder standpoint. I'm talking about the founders of these practices or small groups right now. And then, we think about building a business that's not dependent upon our clinical skill set alone for its existence, right? We mentioned the CE earlier. A lot of successful practice owners are very advanced in their clinical skills. They generate a phenomenal amount of volume, and dentistry is a very physically demanding business. But once you get to the point where you don't want to be the biggest hamster on the wheel anymore, and you want to build a business that creates results through others, creates results through others. That is the cornerstone of every leadership endeavor, is that we create equal or better results through other people. And in this case, it's clinical results through associates. Well, if we're going to start investing the time and to a degree some dollars in them to get them to be combat effective in what we're asking them to do, that means we need to squirrel away some cash on the sidelines before we go and do it, because now we're starting to remove ourselves from 100% chair side responsibility and maybe down to 60 to 80%.
It's another reinvestment, is it not?
Yes, it
Yes.
is 100% reinvestment. In this case, it's reinvestment in yourself, because if done incorrectly and you don't have any margin for error in the business, it can immediately put you in conflict with your family.
Right.
And I've seen that all too often too. So these are all things that I unpack over a course of about a 12-month curriculum in Next Level Executive. And it's a 4-quadrant model, which means it operates on a quarterly basis. You can enroll at the beginning of any quarter. I'm not going to do an infomercial for it here, but each quarter has a theme to it, and all the subject matter that I teach over that quarter plays off of that theme. And I think that a lot of that subject matter takes what I learned at Patterson, and I touched on some of it earlier. It's what I've learned being I would say, a relatively successful entrepreneur in 2 successive startups over the last 8 years. And it's a lot of what I've learned in consulting, coaching, and developing clients over that 8-year period. And I take all of that with some experiential wisdom and put it into somewhat of a deliverable, if you will, in terms of teaching methodology. And I think that a lot of that takes people through somewhat of an MBA course for group healthcare practices. And a group doesn't have to be 10 to 20. I'm talking about possibly a large solo location, 10 to 18 operatories, or it could be, methodically 2 or 3 locations over a decade's worth of time.
I want to go back full circle. So let's go back to Richmond when you were, as you said, head of the keys. That was a failing branch. And you said there was probably some degree of nepotism going on there. So whoever was the manager before had brought in a lot of friends and family. What did you find specifically once you got there? And now we're talking about, was it operation systems? Was it the people? Was it the culture? And what were you advised to do, particularly from the mentors? Did you take action on your own, or did you go upstream to some of the mentors that you talked about to say, wow, I've got this on my hands? And did they give you advice that you followed through on? I'm just curious as to how you implemented going forward with that Richmond branch.
It was a whale of a turnaround effort. I'm not going to lie. I kept a statistic from day one that I was there. And I realized that in 18 months, I had turned over 60% of the entire employment roll. That's a lot of hiring and firing.
You seem like such an amiable person. Was that hard for you to do, or or did you just come in there and decide it's going to happen?
What's the old saying? When you got nothing left to lose.
Yeah.
So I'd like to think I'm a likable guy, but I'm also somebody that believes in leadership, believes in accountability, believes in delivering for results, and also believes in things like culture and supporting your teammates. And one doesn't go without the other. So I think early on, the operations piece was easy to fix. You can get the right people to give you a hand in doing that and get things done the right way. And that's an underpinning of the business. I don't even really count that, because without that, you've got nothing to fall back on. The culture piece is harder. And in a business that is a turnaround, culture matters a lot. David, I would tell you that culture is, if it's not one of your top two or three priorities in a healthcare setting, you're building a commodity service in a commodity world, and you shouldn't be surprised with commodity results.
Right.
And what I mean by that is, if the people who work around you, work for you, and work with you don't believe in making a difference the second the phone rings from a prospective patient, or when they walked through the threshold of your door for the first time to see you, or the way that they're greeted and brought back to an operatory, or the way that you have like a note-taking system that allows you to remember the conversation about their child and they took them to Disney World last time and how did the trip go, to humanize the experience and to really make them feel like they're the most valuable person on the planet. If that's not part of your focus, then what type of a business are we building? And why do we think our patients would value us any more than we value them? And I think that from a culture standpoint, you have to have that fabric. And so I worked hard on that early on. And where I couldn't fix it, I imported it. And there are people who aren't going to embrace your direction. They're not going to embrace the way you want things being done. They're always going to look over their shoulder and say, well, he or she did it differently when they ran the place. And there comes a point where, there's a great Herb Kelleher quote. The former CEO of Southwest Airlines passed away a number of years ago, but you probably remember him, swashbuckling
Oh,
CEO
yes.
and
Oh,
being a
yes.
Texan. I'm sure you have a lot more stories than I do, but for your audience, Herb Kelleher had this great quote that says, "You hire for attitude, you train for skill. You hire for attitude, you train for skill." And you and I both know that most people hire for skill. Can they do the job we're hiring them to do? And then you spend inordinate amounts of time trying to fix interpersonal attitudes and the lack of team cohesion. You got it all wrong. If you hire somebody who has the best attitude, a warm smile on their face, will do anything that you ask, is grateful for the opportunity, is going to make the impact with your patients when they walk through the door, you can teach them the skill.
Yes.
All right. You can teach them the skill. And sometimes when we spend too long with an employee that just doesn't get it and doesn't seem to care, that becomes a you problem, not a them problem, because that's baked in the cake that you can't solve. And you owe it to yourself to upgrade the talent on your team. And I did a lot of that in Richmond early on. I gave them direction. I started doing something called securing early wins. I worked with some of the key salespeople in the sales team and addressed some of their most pressing customer issues and or help them win some new business, taught them a few new skills about some of the digital technology that was new back in the day that happened to be my forte that I could kind of bring some value very quickly on. And then all of a sudden, about 3 years in, I was sitting in my office one day. I used to be in the field half the time with people, and I would be in the office half the time. My phone would ring incessantly, and it was always the fire drill. It was the red phone call, right? Constant. I was sitting in my office one day about 3 years in, and I realized that the phone hadn't rung that day. And then I thought about it and I realized that the phone didn't ring the day before either. And I got worried because I could hear the phone ringing in the customer service department and in the tech service department and all that. So I thought there was something wrong with my phone. So I picked up the phone and called one of my equipment specialists and I said, I'm going to hang up. Can you call me back on my direct line? I think there's something wrong with my phone. Well, I hung up. Ted called. I picked up the phone. It was him. The phone worked just fine. And Ted said, what's your problem? And I said, well, I'm kind of worried because my phone isn't ringing and I don't know what's going on. And he said, well, I'm out here co-traveling with Jeannie right now. Everything's fine. Like we're doing what you hired us to do, you dummy. And that's when you realize that the people you pick and the people you hire for the right attitude, you coach and develop, and you turn them loose. And when they start creating results that are greater than what you can create for yourself and for the business overall, you've reached a different level of leadership at that point. And I would tell you there's nothing more rewarding than seeing the people you pick achieving the results that you asked them to deliver. It's unbelievably gratifying.
It is so gratifying. You know, some of my team because, we interact together. And it's just such a blessing to know that they will take the initiatives because there's a belief and a conviction in what our goals and the outcomes we want for our clients, members, the people we're serving. They own that so deeply that I don't have to worry. And as you said, there's no red phone. When you said that, I just had to smile and think for an instant, you were thinking, am I not needed anymore?
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Like,
there's a little bit of that. We sometimes will self-sabotage because we have a little bit of a need to be needed, right? I mean, we all do. We all have a need to be needed. Not Groundhog Day every day is not the level of need that we want.
this is a great point that you bring up. Like when you're not needed, what does that mean? Because all of us who are motivated entrepreneurs, leaders, achievement oriented people derive some level of self worth through both being needed and delivering the whatever it is that we're trying to deliver. And when others are doing that and you're not needed for that particular task, what happens? Well, this is a great point because many people that get to this point gravitate to what they know best. It's the task that they were brought up doing. And this audience, it's clinical dentistry.
Right.
No, no, stop. That's not what you want to do. Don't gravitate to hygiene checks. This is your next step as a leader. This
Yeah.
is your ability to extricate yourself from the fray and to take on a different level of growth and development for you that will lead the organization. And I think some people have self-doubt, like, have I worked myself out of a job? I'm no longer needed. That's how I derive my self-worth.
Yep.
And what am I going to do with all of my time?
That's right. That's
And,
right.
and I think it's a wonderful problem to have to solve. And if we're intentional about it, the results at the next level can be even more exponentially rewarding.
This is where outside eyes, having that coach, that personal trainer, that person, that guide, who, as you're going through these iterations and you do have a little self doubt, like you kind of look back, like, is this real? And they say, yes, this is it. Go forward because we'll self sabotage and go backward again. You talked about in one of your podcasts, which Next Level Podcast is excellent, but you talked about Roger Bannister, breaking the 4 minute back in '54, right? And before that, like, no one can break it. No one can break it. I'm sure when he broke it, he said, like, is that for real? I mean, check the clocks. Are they right? Because that can't be. Got to get through those ceilings of complexity that you said earlier.
Yep.
Break through one, and it's like, you're just kind of lifted to a higher layer in the clouds, and you go, okay, there's still challenges. There's still things to solve. You're not going to get bored, but don't revert back underneath to where you were because that's where the burnout comes, and that's where you'll self-sabotage every time.
That's right. And the entrepreneurial journey that we're all on is one that is, we chose this life, right? I mean, nobody chose it for us. We're not forced to become entrepreneurs. You have to become comfortable working without a safety net. And sometimes that is financially oriented, hopefully less and less so the later in life you get. But it is equally, from a mindset standpoint, from a confidence standpoint, that the next phase of your evolution is one that is not paint by numbers. And it is something that you have to create. I mean, for me personally, I was writing something in a journal the other day that it dawned on me. I've spent, whether it's the Patterson 15 years or the last 8 years in 2 startups, I've spent the last better part of 3 decades, David, strategically planning every flipping quarter, decade, 5-year period, and everything else for clients, for businesses I ran, for budgets and everything else like that. And literally the 10-year big, hairy, audacious goal to the 5-year picture, the 1-year plan, the 90-day rocks, all this sort of stuff. Well, now as a solopreneur, I'm not strategically planning anything. I get to be a painter with a blank canvas. And I get to have this journey evolve for me somewhat intentionally, somewhat experientially, and somewhat through shared experiences with others. I'm more akin to an artist now than I am a strategist. And if you want to talk about a confident shaking type of a departure, an evolution in terms of mindset, that's one that will rattle your cage a little bit. But I'm also looking forward to it. I haven't fired myself yet.
Yeah. No, the adrenaline of that kind of uncertainty, but the opportunity on their side, it's amazing. Well, we're gonna have to do this again and again and again because this is just so much fun to have these conversations. We'll put it in the notes, but the nextlevelexecutive.com and Perrin, Perrin at the nextlevelexecutive.com. We'll put the place for your podcast as well. And any other information you want, got the notes, we'll get it there for you. Perrin Desportes, thank you so much for being here today. I love the conversation.
Thank you, David. Great to be with you again. 2025 is going to be great for both of us, and I can't wait to spend more time with you. Appreciate the time today.
In my conversation with Perrin, we discussed the era of business we are currently in, one we described as back to fundamentals. With so many so-called experts and oversimplified three-step plans to get rich quickly, here are a few fundamentals you can depend on for both personal and professional financial success that have worked for me. These will not make you rich overnight, but they will prepare you for the tidal wave of change that will bury every other surface-level expert, and they will set you up for both building and keeping your wealth in the decade to come. Number 1, living below your means. Why this is so important is because it's so easy in the world today of growth, expansion, of higher and higher, going further and further, that we have to realize that there is no such thing as a linear growth to the top. That living below our means it creates margin for us. Margin means we have additional liquidity. We're not living right to the extent of our income, or sometimes beyond that. Without pulling back and keeping that margin, it's very difficult to get through difficult times. And it's difficult to make decisions without having that margin in place so that you can iterate. You can make a shift. Not everything goes to plan. And entrepreneurs know this. So having margin and not living to the extent, the maximum of one's income or maximum leverage opportunities, that is financing, way over financing when credit markets are open. Very dangerous times when we go that direction. The fundamentals mean really knowing your numbers, really understanding what your cash flow looks like, and staying within margins that allow you to iterate, change, expand, and take advantage of the opportunities that are coming. Number 2, we are in the people business. We all want to think that we can use financial arbitrage or systems and processes to expand our little empires, whatever they may be. In many extents, those are all pieces of the puzzle. However, we all work in a business which involves people. And that's where many times we have left our inabilities, our incapabilities to the sideline and tried to depend or try to bowl through opportunities without taking heed of the people that actually support our efforts. Those people could be the people on your team, whether they're managers, managing properties, dealing with patients, clients, customers, the experience. So many things there that we, in our capacity as owners and CEOs, need to really lean in on our leadership capabilities. And leadership is something that can be learned over time. But dedicating time to the team and having discussions and role playing and understanding what makes the customer client experience better is very, very important. On the other side is the customer, the client, the patient, the tenant. All these people are coming to us for us to solve a problem for them. And once again, we have to choose who those people are that are best suited for us to work with. If we try to play to all people, it's going to be very, very messy. So designing who our avatar is, who do we choose to work with? How do we define that? How do we set expectations? All these things can really clear the deck of the friction that so many business owners or people in real estate deal with because they don't understand that it is still always a people business. For someone with little money, this is my number 3 fundamental. If you have little money starting out with, how can you potentially partner or work with other people within your network to start compounding your own estate building, your own equity in either business or real estate? Well, this is a key for every young person, and I was a young person once too. and I had little or no money. I had student loan debt. And I realized that for me to really get a foothold into, number one, real estate, which is where I started, is I didn't have the money. I didn't have the credit. I had to partner with other people or create terms on equity that allowed me to get my foot in the door on real estate. That's how I did it. And that's how I started. I gave more of my time, which is something that a lot of people don't have. And so I traded my time to solve problems. In return, I was able to create terms or use other people's money to partner with. And then we shared profits. I think sharing profits is a great way to go in many cases in life because we don't have the time and capacity to do everything. But when we're starting out and we're trying to get a foothold in either business or real estate, both are equity plays, then learning how to provide what you bring to the table, to have a share in that equity, whatever that may be, is a starting point for every young person in life. Hope this has been helpful to you. These are fundamentals that work for me in my life. And I think if you'll really focus on what they mean to you, it can make a huge difference going forward for you.
If you like this conversation, click that subscribe or follow button. It lets us know what you want to hear more of and pushes this episode out to more people. One more thing. One of the greatest joys in my life right now is helping others take control of their lives in every aspect and watching them reshape their lives. Most believe in order to do this, you must first achieve financial freedom. And yes, it's incredibly helpful once you no longer have to work for your income for yourself. However, you can start making progress on your freedoms and your desired life today. Yes, achieving such a life requires getting your finances in order and replacing your income little by little, but it also requires mindset shifts. Working with your spouse or significant other, having the hard conversations, getting educated, and creating the relationships that will help you along the way. These are all keys I found in my life, and I want you to have the same thing. If you're ready to take action and take control of your life today, then my team would love to discuss how we can help you. Go to freedomfounders.com/discover to schedule your call. That's freedomfounders.com/discover. I hope to hear from you soon.